huge schizophrenia in economics, which is simply the other part of the battle between the position that, the economy is at full employment by itself because of market forces, or whether there is unemployment when there's markets. All right, so just at the beginning. Okay, so, but interestingly, what we're learning here is what Keynes wrote in 1936, and it's still kind of dominant in many parts of economics, but it's just intriguing. And it oddly enough comes back in the 1990s. That is, I'm saying, adjust the interest rate to adjust investment to adjust GDP, comes back in the 1990s as like a brilliant new thing, which is the highest point of the criticism of Keynes, because monetarists are interested in the quantity of money, and initially they were interested in the quantity of money to affect its prices, but eventually they realized that they could change the quantity of money better to affect interest rates, and suddenly we're back where Keynes was in 1936. Kind of interesting. In any case, we're going to do, we've done monetary policy in relationship to, the link between monetary policy and GDP, money and GDP, and then I want to do the link between fiscal policy and money and GDP. So I'll just show you what's happening in my notes. Monetary policy, diagrammatic here, increase in money supply, decrease in money supply. You're going to see one of these. There's 4 diagrams here you need to know for this exam. These are 2 of them. Fiscal policy, increase in government spending, decrease in government spending. One of those. Okay? Now here, the effectiveness of fiscal and monetary policy, we are not going to be discussing in this course. The other sections are not going to discuss it. So we're not going to discuss it. So I don't know what page this is. It seems to be page 11, 12, 13, you can skip as well, 14. Just forget all that stuff, right? When it comes to studying for the final exam, and even for studying for this next exam. As I'm talking, by the way, you'll see that the shape of the demand for money function and the marginal efficiency of investment will mean that monetary policy, fiscal policy is more or less strong. And then eventually I end up with, how does one finance, I'll talk very briefly about it, but I don't expect you to know it. How does one finance government spending? And we'll see that on the one hand, government spending has certain predictable effects, say, but how you finance it is also very interesting. You would have to know this for the exam, right? So you have to go up to page 10 for the exam. Let me quickly remind you, by running through my diagrams here, this is monetary policy. Up here, I explain the marginal efficiency of investment. All right? So let's look at this. Okay, look. These are the 3 diagrams. In the upper left here is the money, demand, and supply diagram. Supply of money originally, demand for money originally. In the lower diagram, simply because I'm dealing with money first, is aggregate expenditure Y equilibrium. In the right-hand diagram up here at the top is the marginal efficiency of investment diagram. So, we'll draw them in a minute, but this thing here, look at it. What it's telling you is basically, it's another form of what we call the diminishing marginal product of capital, but in a somewhat better theoretical form, even though there's some elements about it that might not be perfect. It just says, as you increase investment in the first place, this thing here says, as you increase investment, the rate of return from additional units of investment goes down. Now, Keynes explains that very comfortably for a given industry. So let's take any industry. I'll take, let's take the, what would be a new industry here? Let's take the web industry, like internet industry, webs, kind of the web, putting stuff on the web, right? And say the 1990s. All right. it turns out there's a lot of money to be made putting stuff on the web, to do work on the web, to create websites. And in fact, this is one of the big things in the stock market boom of the 1990s. All right, here's the deal. So long as there's not many web providers or people who know how to put up web pages and the like, the demand is large, there's not many providers, the price is high, right? On the other hand, if there's not many web providers, it's not expensive to hire the people who know how to do this. It's not expensive to get the equipment to do this. So initially, there's a high profit. If you, as more and more people see the high profit in putting up web pages and such, then it expands. And as it expands, there's more people competing to sell web pages, the price goes down. On the other hand, so the price is going down. On the other hand, they're competing for the available talent to do web pages and the available equipment. They push up the cost of web pages. So profit goes down. Everybody? So within a given industry, you can imagine that the more investment there is, the more competition there is pushing down price, and the more competition there is for the factors of input pushing up cost. Hence the profit rate goes down. That's simple enough to see. So this downward sloping rate of return really makes a lot of sense within a given industry. Keynes applies it to the society as a whole. The same logic doesn't necessarily apply there. But the idea is, number one, this is essentially the expected rate of return on additional investment expressed as an interest rate. As I said to you, as that interest rate, which would give the net present value costs minus net returns in the future, the net present value 0. All right, so that gives you this. And as further says, as we saw last day, for a given interest rate, investment will go up to the point where the rate of return on the marginal investment, the last unit investment, is exactly equal to the interest rate. Not beyond that. Because no, see this point right here? Here, relative to R1, right here, that's supposing R1 is 10%. Here, right here, it's beyond I1. This investment here, if you did that, you're getting 90%. Number one, supposing you had that kind of money, like $1 million, why would you invest in a project at 9% when the interest rate is 10%? You lend it at 10%, right? So there's not going to be any investment. Secondly, would you borrow the money? No. It costs you 10% to borrow the money and you're only making 9%. So you don't do that. You stop. But what about if it was the rate of return was 10.5%? If you guys right now, if you could get a rate of return guaranteed, now let's assume that this return is guaranteed. If I could go out right now and get a rate of return guaranteed, it's something like, put your money in this apartment complex, promise you 10.5%. I go to the bank, I borrow at 10%, and give this person the $1 million I got from the bank at 10%, and get a return of 10.5%. Hey, it's not huge money, but it's 0.5% on somebody else's million. It's $50,000, and I'm not doing anything, right? So in short, right up to the point, even if I got $10,000 from this, 0.1 difference percent, that's fine because it's somebody else's money and I'm making the rate of return. So basically the argument is, so long as you can borrow cheaper than the expected rate of profit, you do so. So investment goes up to that point. Now the idea is then, the lower the interest rate, the more you invest. So it turns out, if you guys pay any attention, and you need to be paying attention between now and the exam, you'll see that there's discussions of quantitative easing. Please pay attention. Like the Bernanke, the chair of the Federal Reserve, is talk about him being replaced. There's going to be talk about the policy. In the U.S., the situation is so bad, they lowered the interest rate to almost 0, with the expectation that at 0, people would invest. Everybody would borrow. And people did borrow, but they're not investing. Why should you invest? There's nothing to be made in investing right now, really. So Keynes, by the way, argued in his whole book, there's hardly anything about government spending. And yet, because the interest rate is extremely low in the early 50s, late 40s and early 50s, Keynesianism became associated with the idea that Keynesianism is government spending and tax cuts. Kennedy, for example, cut taxes. Trudeau spent, cut taxes. All this is supposed to be Keynesian. Cutting interest rates is not associated with Keynes. Kind of as an accident of history, because for the first almost 10 years after World War II, the interest rate was kept pretty low. Now, I'm just going to, why would you keep the interest rate low after World War II? Why would you do that, people? Why was the interest rate low during World War II? Why do you think? Because the government in Canada and the United States in particular, but also in Europe, insofar as they did this, needed money for war. Well, where are they going to get the money from? Get it from the public. Well, we're going to pay the public 6 or 7 or 8% of borrow money to build tanks? No. We're going to get money from the public at 1%. We're going to tell them, look, this is your patriotic duty. Lend your money to the government. But they're not going to do it. First of all, they wouldn't have a lot of money. So what the government did on the one hand was they essentially printed money and gave it to the banks. And on the other hand, they sold bonds to they basically sold bonds to the public really cheaply at 1%, providing money to the banks so the banks could buy it, so that they could obviously be facilitated. And they ended up borrowing money really cheaply. Now this turns out to be inflationary in this particular way. I won't go into the details of it. But essentially what they ended up doing was the public, say the Canadian public during World War I, lent all their money to the federal government so the federal government could go to war, right? And then they were happy enough with their 1% because this was their patriotic duty. Now what would happen after World War II if the government let the interest rate rise? People, tell me what would happen to the bonds that these people held that they originally bought with an interest rate of 1%. Tell me what would happen to those bonds. Yeah,
They would lose value.
They would lose value big time. They would lose value. So this they couldn't do. They couldn't basically take advantage of the public taking the money during the war, and then after the war raise the interest rate and wipe these people out. That'd be no good. So for like 4 or 5 years, they kept the interest rate low, which is part of the reason they're still doing it now, right? They like to kind of raise the interest rate, but there'd be a hue and cry. In any case, what Keynes argued was this: when the interest rate is really low, lowering the interest rate doesn't do anything. Say below 2% doesn't do anything. Nobody's going to invest. And in fact, I don't know there's been a whole lot of investment given Obama's low interest rates. It's prevented bankruptcies, but it hasn't caused investment. And Keynes said that would be the case. In that case, you would need government spending. So if Keynes was here, like in 2008 with Obama, he would say, it's pointless to roll the interest rate between below 2%. You're not going to get much action there. You're not going to get much investment. You should increase government spending. So tell me then, why didn't Obama increase government spending? He did to some extent, but why didn't he increase it more? Why doesn't he increase it now if he wants to get out of this slow recovery? Come on, people, tell me. I want to know. If you don't know, shame on you. Tell them.
Political opposition.
Yeah, the Republicans objected to it. They objected to it because the U.S. government was in deficit. The U.S. government was in deficit because that superstar Bush went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan and blew up the U.S. budget and simultaneously cut taxes. So Obama came and the government was there. The point is, all this stuff you guys can understand from an economic point of view, and you can understand from a political point of view, which is what you need to be doing. Now, it turns out in Canada, we don't have these issues. We didn't have these issues because in the 2000s, the Canadian government didn't go to war. The Canadian government didn't cut taxes. And when the recession came, Canada happily, okay, Obama came and basically said to the Harvard, listen, help us out. We need to get you guys spending. Okay, fine, we'll spend. After all, we have surplus funds. We can do that. And this is not something Harper wants to do. But he could do it. Obama couldn't do it without serious opposition. All right. So, all that about this. Now, by the way, see, one of the things is this marginal efficiency of investment. Now, what happens, you could lower this interest rate and you actually don't get any more investment. So I could do this, for example. Just a final point. Oftentimes I give you more information about this than you absolutely need for the exam. For the perhaps naive idea that you want to know about the world you live in and actually think about these things, other than some memorization of a bunch of junk that economists are telling you. Because therefore, as I say to you, you can't really believe economists because they're all debating this. They're just not telling you. I'm telling you. But most of them are not going to tell you, right? So this, here is, don't draw this, just be aware. This is, say, right now, forget the fact that at price level and real wider, this is the marginal efficiency of investment, or sometimes called marginal efficiency of capital. And let's say this is the original interest rate. Now then, everybody, I want you to tell me this. In 2008, before the US economy crashed, what do you think the people thought the rate of return to expect on housing, let's say, on cars? This is before the crash. They might have thought that if you invested in Detroit cars, you would make a 10% return. If you invested in houses, you would make an 8% return. If you invested in oil, which at that point was $150, you would make a 20% return. What do you think the expected rate of return of oil was a scant year later when the price of oil fell to $50? Or a scant year later when totally Detroit completely and utterly collapsed? Or a year later when the housing industry in the United States was leading to foreclosures? What do you think happened with the marginal efficiency of investment? Everybody? My point is, it's not constant. For us to assume it's constant, but it's not. So you get a problem. For example, this. It turns out this is NEI in 2008. But this is it. Again, visualize it. It is nothing more than the expected return. And the expected return changes. The thing completely crashed out. This is NEI in 2009. So Bush and Obama together lowered the interest rates, but in fact, look at it. Investment did in fact go up. If the MEI hadn't changed, maybe investment would have gone up. But it in fact didn't. But notice, if they didn't lower the interest rate, they would have been even worse off. If they did lower the interest rate, they would have been back here with this amount of investment. All right? So no, there's a lot of sophistication in this we're not going into. I'm trying to make sure you can do the absolute flat-out basics. And if you can do that, then you can start thinking about the sophistication, which is something you should be doing, so you understand the world that you live in. All right, so back then to this. All right, so we initially started with an initial marginal efficiency of investment, initial supply of money determined by the government, essentially, but that's Bank of Canada say, an initial demand, which is a function of this equilibrium Y, which is a function of this aggregate expenditure, which also includes this I0, which is a function of the demand for money. So these things are mutually determined. We start here, R0. The government wants to stimulate the economy. They don't have to piddle around and talk about, building things and issues about corruption. For example, in one of the earlier, in the 2001, the Chrétien government, there was issues of whether they, pork barrel gave money to various ridings that were liberal ridings and it was spent improperly and there was, this kind of foolishness. Now it turns out that spending might itself have been a multiplier effect, but it was corrupt. A lot of it was corrupt. So there's no need for corruption. The government simply increases the supply of money, buys a few bonds, the banks increase the money supply, the public gets a lower interest rate, the interest rate falls, they move to this new corner demand of money, more investment, A shifts up, new equilibrium law. Everybody? Good. This is the example of the reverse. When would you want the reverse? When there is inflation, near full employment. If you're near full employment, the government doesn't want the economy to expand any faster, as we're going to see later today. So they might increase the interest rate just to break the economy. Okay. Now the next thing is, we're going to do, now this next exam, by the way, we're going to do one of these diagrams, one of these four, basically for 8 marks. Absolutely. Then I'm going to do an equation type thing for 8 marks, right? So we're going to do the equation thing in a minute. This is a little bit more tricky. Okay, we're going to do a change in government spending and how it's related to the interest rate. And here's an increase and decrease in government spending, and we're going to do it like this. So, let us begin. With three, in this case, no, I don't want to consider, hang on. All right, we're going to go with 3 diagrams. Everybody, I'll get rid of this. Our upper diagram is going to be, I'll give you a clue. It's going to be aggregate demand, or it's going to be, sorry, real Y and real aggregate expenditure. And I want you to draw the other 2 diagrams of money demand and money supply, and marginal efficiency of investment, all of it in equilibrium. See if you can do it. See if you can put it together now. See if you can put those diagrams together and do it. These diagrams are kind of cool because you use all of your ideas. You're able to kind of determine things with a really good sense. Don't look it up. Think about it. Okay. R, supposedly the real interest rate. For us, a little overblown because we don't worry too much about it. In some ways, it may not even be right. M over P here, real money supply. Over here, R. Over here, real investment as a function of the interest rate. Now, no, over here, we're going to have I'm going to start with all those things I can easily do. Here we have 45-degree line. Let's put 45 down here. And here, the supply of money, it's exogenous, everybody. It's determined by the government and the known parameters of the reserve ratio and currency circulation. Supply of money, period 0. I'll do it with capital. Supply of money, period 0. This is a specific amount of money is determined by the. And I can say, because this is essentially exogenous to some other issues, this is the marginal efficiency of investment or capital. And the I. All right. Now the reason I try to get you to set this up, it turns out we have a mutually determined system here. I don't know income unless I know the demand for money and the interest rate, because I don't know investment. The investment, that's a function of the interest rate. And I don't know the demand for money unless I know income. So I really don't know where to jump in. We're just going to jump in. Right? I'm going to assume that we have the aggregate expenditure function. Like this. Now notice how I write it, because I'll come back to it later. Aggregate expenditure is A0. What that means is all the autonomous junk in the economy, autonomous consumption, autonomous investment as a function of prices and technology, whatever. Autonomous government spending, autonomous exports, autonomous imports, all of that stuff is in that A0. You know, I've separated out only one piece, which is here, I'm separating out one part of autonomous expenditure, and that's I0. That's the investment, that's a function of the interest rate, because that's the only thing that's going to change autonomously here. You know, we could change government, we're going to change government spending. That's in here too, right? But you'll see that in a minute. Plus, E, the marginal propensity to consume, times Y, like that. So this is our usual aggregate expenditure function, it's just I separate out this thing here. Okay, and this gives us Y0, like that. And Y0 gives us the demand for money, if we know the parameter of money and the demand for money is a function of the interest rate. But now I have the demand for money, right? Because otherwise I don't know where it is. Now this could be steeper or flatter or whatever. For the moment, just note that it's not the same as this thing over here. Their relative slopes are, you know, totally determined by themselves, so to speak, they're independent. And I'll later show you that what those slopes are would make a difference. But we don't want to discuss that really here. We don't care. So there's the demand for money. Demand for money is a function of Y0, right? And that gives us the interest rate here, like that. Here's R0. And that R0 will come to in a minute. R0 is right there. And that R0, as it turns out, defines investment as a function of the interest rate goes right up to there, right? And this is I0. Okay. Okay. Now, so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about government spending and what we're going to do with that. So, we are first of all going to increase government spending. This is called expansionary fiscal policy. I'm exaggerating this, everybody, just let it happen. This shift here is an increase in G. Like that. So G is going up. I'll just put it at the very top over here, I'll put expansionary fiscal policy, right? That's what this is. Now we could cut taxes, by the way, but we wouldn't have quite as much multiplier. Agreed? Okay, so there's G. Then this is, now I'm going to call this is initial thing I might call A0. This is I'm going to call AES. AES because it has the new GS is a change, but the original IO, right? GS has changed. G is not the same, so therefore it's not quite the same function. But IO is the same. Okay, and that gives us YS. All right, everybody. What is this distance here to here? What defines that distance? Tell me. What defines that shift in YO to YS? What defines that? You all know that, right? What is it? Huh? Sorry? For an answer? Huh? No, the change in inventories would be like, it would be this vertical part here if it existed. There's no change. This is a shift. This is the increase in Y. How much does Y increase by? Do you know? You do know, actually. How much, not as a number, as a concept. How much does Y increase by? Don't forget this, everybody, because this is really important. It increases by